year is 1957. Dwight Eisenhower begins his second term as president. Brooklyn Dodgers owner Walter O'Malley agrees to move his team to Los Angeles. And a young singer named Elvis Presley makes his final appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show, shown only from the waist up. From the barren steppes of the Kazakh Republic, the Soviet Union shocks the world and changes the course of history with the successful launch of Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. In the United States, Americans react with unease and dismay, and tensions mount with the fear that the Soviets would develop weaponized spacecraft that could orbit the Earth. The Cold War and the threat of nuclear holocaust elevates global anxiety to a fever pitch. To understand Soviet nuclear capability, in 1956, the Central Intelligence Agency began using high-altitude U-2 aircraft equipped with cameras and signals intelligence recorders to overfly the Soviet Union. The clandestine program ended abruptly when a U-2 flown by Francis Gary Powers was shot down by a Soviet missile in May 1960. In December 1958, roughly 14 months after the launch of Sputnik, President Dwight D. Eisenhower authorized a top-priority reconnaissance satellite project, jointly managed by the CIA and the United States Air Force. America's first operational reconnaissance satellite was launched in June 1960, under a cover so deep that its mission remained secret for nearly 4 decades. In 1992, the 10th director of the National Reconnaissance Office led an effort to declassify the existence of a government agency previously unknown to the American public. His name was Martin Clark Faga. Marty Faga grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, with his younger sister Betsy, exhibiting traits at an early age that would become his hallmark later in life.
His ability to get things done, having a paper route, doing well, obviously, at school. He was the real star, involved in math and engineering, while I was completely opposite, looking at languages and other kinds of activities.
He graduated from Lehigh University in 1963 with a degree in electrical engineering. He was commissioned in the Air Force when he graduated. And then after that, he was stationed at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, doing research and development work for the Air Force.
He had a career as an engineer, first in the Air Force and then at the CIA with a couple things sprinkled in before. But when he got in the CIA, he was interested in infrared, and he was interested in lasers, and he was growing up in engineering. But my first real memory was when he transitioned from CIA to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence.
And during that time, he formed pretty important relationships and gained a lot of respect from many of the congressmen.
One of the members that Marty worked for was Dick Cheney. He was on the minority side in the House of Representatives.
After a decade on the committee, Richard Cheney was appointed the Secretary of Defense, and one of his first decisions was to bring Martin Faga to be the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Space and, covertly, the Director of the National Reconnaissance Office.
Marty was nominated, confirmed, and starting in the job, he had been training his whole career for that job. He was the perfect person to take the leadership of the NRO. He was ready. He knew the technologies. He knew the people. He knew the industries. He knew the threat. And he knew his colleagues in the national intelligence community.
Marty had a huge impact at the NRO. He was there at a time when really the world was changing, and he recognized that the NRO had to change. And if you take a step back and think about it, it was in the late 80s and the early 90s. The Cold War was coming to an end. The Cold War did end. We had the first Gulf War. That really was a change in where things were going.
I take most pride in our performance during the first Gulf War, which was the first time that NRO systems were sufficiently real-time to be meaningful. in the tactical fight.
Colin Powell described the Gulf War as the first space war. And what that meant was all of the training of the military and all the training of the intelligence analysts came together so that by the provisioning the right information at the right time, it allowed battle space decisions to be made that advanced the cause of the battle while saving lives.
Major General Paul Funk was a division commander in the attack that came in from the west, which was a complete surprise to the Iraqis.
You'll remember the left hook that the Schwarzkopf forces took and got behind the Iraqi forces, and that wouldn't have been possible without us knowing where all of the bad guys were.
Well, they could see where the ambushes were being set up. They could see where the enemy was lying in wait, and they had, what we used to call the God's eye view of the battlefield, in a sense, all provided, arguably for the first time, to the tactical warfighter.
He said they would move. I almost immediately knew them. He said I knew exactly where they were. He said my tanks took them out, and we proceeded with essentially no casualties. He said had they been successful, it would have been a bloodbath. He said that was the difference that you guys made. Of course, I don't take personal credit for that, but nonetheless, the best day of my life.
Marty was, I think, the first, but if not the first, one of the first, to recognize that we needed to let people know that we had this capability, because now it's not going against or dealing with a nation state, it's dealing with a much broader organization. And it was important to show the value of this organization beyond just the intelligence community.
It was part of Marty's belief that the continued protection, if you will, of the fact that the NRO existed was a waste of resources.
And so the decision was made, prompted by Marty Faga, working with the Secretary of Defense, to declassify the organization, and its basic mission allowed the American people to understand what it was, why it's important, and to appreciate that not everything can be made available to the public.
Marty served 4 years as the director of the NRO before leaving in 1993.
When he retired from the NRO, he retired from government service, was hired at MITRE Corporation as a vice president, and spent several years as a vice president, and then executive vice president, and then eventually was president and CEO of MITRE until he retired fully in 2006.
The MITRE Corporation was the perfect place for Marty. It's a not-for-profit. It's interested in doing the right thing, and that's its sole reason for existence.
He left MITRE because MITRE had a mandatory retirement age for executives, which he had reached. I think he would have happily stayed longer had he been allowed to.
In 2007, Marty joined the board of directors of Space Foundation, serving as board chair from 2012 to 2014. In 2013, less than 6 weeks before the 29th Space Symposium, Space Foundation was informed that due to a budget sequestration, non-essential travel for government employees was halted, and no NASA or military personnel would attend that year's Space Symposium. Space Foundation and its board of directors, led by Marty Faga, pivoted immediately.
Marty's the one who was the calming influence, but also saw the clear direction we needed to go in if we were going to have a successful symposium, and ultimately to move the organization into the next phase, which was to be more international and to be more focused on all different tiers of manufacturers. It was a time of great change, and Marty was our leader.
I think Marty was able to bring some of the transition that he had led in government service into the Space Foundation. It was exactly the right time to do that. And the growth that we were able to see over these last years under Tom Zellebor and now under Heather is tribute to that.
Marty Faga passed away in October 2023, but the impact he had on those whose lives he touched cannot be measured.
My dad told me, when I was quite a young man, that he considered himself very lucky because he really loved what he did, and that not very many people could say that. I think I was too young to appreciate it at the time, but as I have gotten older, I appreciate what he meant, first of all, and second of all, I can look back and see that he genuinely did love what he did.
He was thoughtful. He never jumped to conclusions. He was honest. And the main thing that he was worried about was doing the right thing.
Well, with Marty, it was never about him. In other words, with some people, you have a conversation and you always get the sense that they're looking over your shoulder to see if somebody more important, or in my case, better looking, just walked into the room. That was never the case with Marty. He was interested in you and what you had to say.
Marty was not someone to beat his chest, and you felt comfortable. If I could think of one word in dealing with Marty Faga, it's a high level of comfort and trust. 2 words. 3 words.
Marty had an ethical compass that was always true north, and he knew what was required to do right.
My fondest memories of working with Marty is that he always had these kind, listening eyes. He always had that burning intellect, always a quick smile, that he would listen to you. You know the listening was sincere.
I think that's my big brother. He deserves it. You can see emotionally it means a great deal. And he's 1 in a million.